Welcome to Season 2 of Heroes Wanted. We are going to start this thing out with a bang. So happy to bring you this conversation, this interview with my good friend Myles from Archangel Dynamics. My name is Joe Prim. I'm the host of this podcast, and I believe that if you are here, that you are uncommon. I believe that an ember burns deep inside of you, searching for the fuel to grow into an inferno. And I believe that unlike most men, you are no longer content with mediocrity. Unlike most men, you are ready to commit to a change. Unlike most men, you know that you were meant for more. And unlike most men, you are willing to make the sacrifices necessary, not only for yourself, but those that you love and value most. Like I said, this episode, I have an epic conversation with Myles Francis. He was a frequent guest back in the day of Ever Vigilant. Usually our conversations circulated around first aid and preparation and things of that nature because that's his jam. That's what he knows about. He is an expert in that field. We start out this episode talking about that as he brings his business, Archangel Dynamics, back online and starts selling product again and starts his training classes, and we dig deep into that. But really what makes this conversation special is the vulnerability of Myles to share what's been going on in his life for the last 2 years. Most men would bury this stuff deep and hide it. But rather than hide it as part of a healing process for himself, he's come out and shared where he's been, what he's been up to, the fight, the struggles, the trials, and ultimately the road back, the triumph, the winning, the phoenix rising out of the ashes. Myles is a good friend. He's one of the original guys that I interviewed often on that first podcast of mine, Ever Vigilant, that came back time after time after time, not only because the good conversations, but because of the friendship that was born out of those conversations. So I'm really excited to bring you this episode. I wanted to start this season 2 out with a bang. Next episode, I will record myself and I'll kind of dig into where I've been, what season 2 is going to be about in the future moving forward with Heroes Wanted. But until then, let's jump into this conversation. I'm really happy to bring it here. If the first part of it isn't really your jam, isn't what you're into as we talk about his business, go ahead and skip forward or just be patient. Got to give people time sometimes to settle their mind and figure out exactly where they want to go, how they want to word things, and how they're going to move forward into the deeper part of this conversation. So stick around. This is one that will make a big impact on you. And if it doesn't make an impact on you today where you stand, maybe we'll make an impact on you and leave a memory for down the line, or some ideas and thoughts and ways to show others empathy where they are at today, or ways to encourage and challenge those that you know that are in a similar position to where Myles has been. So with that out of the way, let's jump right into this conversation with Myles Francis from Archangel Dynamics. So Myles, it is awesome to be sitting back in front of a microphone once again with you, my brother. Why don't you share a little bit for those who don't know you, that didn't listen to our conversations on Ever Vigilant? Why don't you just share a little bit about who you are and what you do, and then a little later we'll get into where you've been.
Yeah. Hey, Joe. Good to see you again. I think we were on first episode was what, like episode 30 something. We talked about like building trauma kits.
Yeah.
So, hey, everyone. My name is Myles. Where do we start here? I lived a very eclectic life. I've been on a lot of fun adventures and taken a lot of career risks in my life. Right out of high school, I went into the Army, ended up serving in combat overseas, then went and worked as a private military contractor, working as a medic for a couple of companies, traveled a bit with that. Then got into EMS, and I've been working there since as a critical care flight paramedic, although I recently stopped flying for health and physical and mental health reasons. I am divorced. I am a father of two. I am a Christ follower, and I like to lift heavy things for fun. And and I'm a small business owner. So I guess there's that too, but that's really me in a busted nutshell.
I love it, Myles. So you mentioned your small business, and I was cracking up the other day because my brother recently bought a new truck to tow his RV around, and he sold his house there in Tennessee, and he came down here to Texas to visit us, and he pulls in, he parks RV, pulls his truck away, and I notice on his bumper is a sticker from none other than Archangel Dynamics.
No kidding. Yeah, I've actually spoken with him a few times on Instagram. That's really cool that it's on his truck. I love it. So I guess that's about as good of a segue as we can get into talking about what my business does. So it's a very small business. I own it. I'm the chief instructor. I currently have 2 full-time instructors working with me and a couple part-timers I bring in. My business focuses primarily on the armed and prepared citizen. So what we offer, we sell trauma kits, either full-sized, fully equipped trauma kits. And we have multiple tiers and pricing levels that you can come into on that. We also sell individual items. I distribute for North American Rescue, H&H, Persis Medical Systems, a couple of other companies. And also starting to get into some survival equipment, tactical gear, and some like clandestine, non-permissive environment type stuff that you guys can check out on the website. We've got some cool stuff there for that. We also do education. So the other side of that is not only do we equip you, but we train you. So right now we have our tactical medical class. I've taught about a dozen of those so far. It's a 2-day real high-speed class. You take the class, you get one of our fully stocked trauma kits with graduating it. And you learn everything about wound packing and pressure bandages and tourniquet application, chest seals, whole 9 yards on tactical medicine. I'm about to roll out, and I'm going to be having my first class this summer down in Tucson. That's going to suck, but luckily it's an indoor class. Our Medical 2 class, and that is going to cover preventative med. So we're going to talk about disease prevention, food handling, water procurement, waste management. I know it doesn't sound as sexy as, bullets flying and blood spraying everywhere, but people die just as much from infectious disease as they do from gunfire in a grid down setting. So the first day will be predominantly preventative medicine. The second day we'll talk about patient assessment and management. So the second day is really more geared to if you are the quote unquote medic of your prepper group and you're looking to learn more about primary care. But it certainly is open to anybody that wants to just get more primary care education. So we're going to cover, how to manage ear infections and sinus infections, how to treat pneumonias, foreign body in the eye, foreign body in the ear, wound care. We're going to do a good 1-hour lecture on wound care. A whole bunch of other stuff that I really don't want to take up too much of the podcast talking about, but it's going to be a really great class to people who maybe have taken either my tactical first aid class or somebody else's, but are looking to really expand their prepper medical knowledge In particular, we're going to talk a lot about antibiotic administration. Anybody can go to the store and buy fish antibiotics. I think you ought to be educated on which ones to use, how much to give, and how long to give it based on what's going on. So it's going to be a really good class. So that's rolling out this fall. One of my good friends from when I was a very young man, his name is Jim. If you guys go check out the website, you can actually look at our cadre page, and it's got photographs and a bio for all of our instructors. Jim went into the Marine Corps after 9/11, and I went into the Army. We both enlisted at the same time. And while he served, he was a Marine Corps machine gun instructor as well as a rifle marksmanship instructor. And he actually served at 29 Palms, training up sailors and Marines getting ready to go downrange. So he is going to be bringing some really high-speed rifle classes to us this fall to add to our existing list of pistol classes that we already offer. So it's an exciting thing. There's a little bit more in the works I'm not going to talk about because I don't want to ruin the surprise, but we're going to be collaborating with some cool people. Dane, if you're listening, Dane from the Gunmetal Armory, he and I have collaborated on a couple of things in the past, and we're working on some collaborations in the future, more along the lines of that, like non-permissive environment, survival gear type stuff. So there's a lot going on with it, but I'm very excited about it. Certainly check us out on Instagram and on the website. We have a blog. I'm also working on shooting some videos for our YouTube channel. So let's say you go to the website and you're curious about why do I have 9 different types of pressure bandages? Well, we're going to have videos on all the bandages teaching you how to apply them, the specifics about them, dimensions, weight, etc., the pros and cons, all that great stuff. I would still love to see you guys in one of my classes, but this is still a good way to get educated on our product line as well, which is pretty cool. So really excited. I took a bit of a hiatus with my divorce. But we're going to be coming back full force this year with the business, and there are some really awesome things coming.
Cool. And what I like about Myles is anytime I had a new like first aid product that would come across my radar, and I'd hit up Myles and say, "Hey, Myles, what is this? Is this something you recommend?" And he always did his due diligence, and he would tell me, "Well, I've read this article about it, or I've gone into this journal and found out this information about it," and would give his honest opinion on if it was something that he thought was valuable or if it was something that he thought he wanted to get a little bit more information on. So he always does his due diligence with all the products that he sells on his website, as well as with his trauma kits. And the other thing that I appreciate about Archangel Dynamics with their trauma kits, like you said, there's a wide range of options there. A lot of guys have only the big trauma setups, and for people that are just getting into first aid and just trying to understand it, it's probably overkill with their skill set and probably overkill with their budget. So Myles has got some good options in there too that are just kind of keep in your back pocket or in your glove box or something like that, options that are practical for just going to the park with your family and when the electricity is still on. So that's awesome, Myles. Good to hear that you're back up and running on that, especially with the training. One question I have, though, about training, just because of the kind of guy I am, what percentage of your classes are hands-on and what percentage is just looking at slides from a slide projector?
That's a good question. So I'm a really big fan when I do education, both with my small business and with the department I work for on the ambulance. I like to break things down the way that the military used to do it: crawl, walk, run. You introduce the concept, you do a one-on-one mentored skills lab, and then you do a live scenario lab. So, for example, we might do an hour-long PowerPoint on hemorrhage control, where we talk about applying a tourniquet, wound packing, and applying a pressure bandage. Then I will take you with either myself or one of my other instructors, and we will do a one-on-one mentored coaching station where you get to work with a wound packing simulator and train with the tourniquets. And then on the second day of the class, the second day of that trauma class, is all live patient sim. So I have a lot of volunteers that come out. A lot of them are former students of mine that I allow them to sit in the class because knowledge, medical knowledge is always updating. So they get to learn the new updates. But then they also volunteer their time to me to serve as essentially a meat puppet, for lack of a better word. We get them all done up with moulage. I have prosthetics that actually spray fake blood, and we make a very immersive, stress inoculated training environment on the third day, where all the stuff you learned in lecture, all the stuff you learned in the skills lab breakouts now comes full circle. And it starts with one patient, then moves to two patients. And then by the end of the day, you've got 8 patients, simulated patients, spread out across the ground, and all of them require trauma management of some sort or another. And you've got to make the right choice and do things in the right order.
Cool. That's awesome. There's a great woman close by where I live in Austin, Katie Contreras, and she teaches a Stop the Bleed class. And I mean, she travels this whole area. That's like her jam. She's a great teacher, but I'll tell you what, it makes all the difference in the world being able to play around with a tourniquet and being able to actually stuff a wound and actually be able to do that stuff. I took the class maybe a year and a half ago myself, and then 6 months ago with the kids. And it was good to give them the opportunity to see what a tourniquet is, play around with it. And, again, too, with the wound packing, it's so much different than, so many of the old classes that you used to attend, where it was just you're watching a slideshow and it's just all theory. There's no concept of what this is really like in real life. So I like that you're doing that, especially with the number of patients, and there's actually teachers teaching you those things one-on-one, hands-on. And I don't know, maybe some people are really good at learning out of a textbook, but for me, there's absolutely there's no substitute for doing something hands-on.
Oh, absolutely. And it comes, it has to come from the right source too. So like I said, my background, critical care, flight paramedic, tactical paramedic. Jim, my newest instructor, is also an EMT, and has a lot of experience from the military and tactical medicine. And a couple of my part-time instructors are also paramedics. They're SWAT medics. They're ER nurses that help out with the classes. So having the right person teach it to you is really important. You should always look at someone's background when they offer a class like this, especially, I charge around $400 for a 2-day class. I want to make sure it's worth your time as a student. Part of that is the cost of the trauma kit, but the rest of it is, paying my staff, et cetera. You want to make sure that the people teaching you to put a tourniquet on have actually done it before, right? And then the flip side of that is, I believe there absolutely is value in reading blogs and, internet bulletin boards, although just be careful with your sources there, or watching YouTube videos. I'm sure your listeners are familiar with Dietrich, Skinny Medic. Great educational videos, but he'll say the same thing I'm saying. You can only learn so much watching a video about tourniquet applications or doing a chest seal or managing an airway. You need to get into a class and do it hands on. And again, one of the things that I think is unique about my business is that if you have graduated this class, if you're an alumni of this class, if you agree to come back at a future class to serve as a simulated patient, I'll let you refresh. You can sit in the class, listen to the lecture. Once all the students have gone through the skill stations, if you want to work one-on-one with either myself or one of the other educators and say, hey, I'd like to practice wound packing for a few minutes real quick. It's kind of like my way of saying, thank you for supporting my business. Come on back, support the next round of students, and we'll refresh that knowledge and training for you at the same time.
Yeah, and what a good way not only to give back to your past clients like that, but also ingrain those lessons, just that little step deeper and little deeper and little deeper, because, it does no good to have only a concentrated group of people know how to do this. All of us are here trying to spread knowledge that in hopes that it sinks into a point with somebody else to where they can share it with their child or with their neighbor, and it grows out from where we are, because I'm sure that your intent, Myles, is not to create this little tiny group of people that know how to do what you do. you see a great enough need there, and that's why you're teaching this classes. This is a service to everybody, not just the people that are going to your class. And your $400 charge for the class is probably about as cheap as you're going to find for a quality class taught by the caliber of teachers that you have.
Yeah, that's absolutely correct. I'm very proud of my background and the background of those that I choose to work with. And all of us have either military or law enforcement backgrounds that are teaching this. We have had to do these unfortunate skills in real life. Yeah. So we bring a lot of realism to the class. But if you've ever listened to any of my other podcasts, I'm going to be getting back to it again. I took a hiatus from quite a bit with the divorce, but I was a regular on the Prepper Broadcasting Network. I was on Dane's show once a month. And one of the things that I really preach, not just in my podcast, but also in my blog posts and in every class of mine that students come to, I treat it like a family. Like, we'll go to lunch together and we'll talk about prepper theory over lunch. The concept of a mutual assistance group is key when it comes to survival, to long-term survival. And, I've seen anything from a guy that comes to my class who says, hey, I'm an EMT basic, I'm the medic for my prepper group. I've also had entire prepper groups come together and take the class. But what it comes down to is, if you're going to take my class and you are an EMT, paramedic, nurse, you're your group's designated quote unquote medic, make sure you're disseminating that knowledge to everybody. When I was working overseas, I made it very clear, hey, if guys need advanced care that only the medic can provide, I expected the guys on my fire teams and my rifle squads to know how to control a hemorrhage, to know how to apply a chest seal. Because if I have to futz around with a chest seal when this patient ultimately needs a chest tube placed or a needle decompression or some more advanced skill that's in my wheelhouse, that's wasting time. So you got to make sure, even if you are that highest level of practice in your preparedness group, that everybody gets the basics mastered so that not only they can take care of themselves and their families, but if there ever really was a major crisis and you had to put all your skills on the table, you can rely on the rest of your group to help you with the more basic skills.
Yeah, and I think this is one reason why first aid classes in general are a little bit different, and especially with what you're doing, is because there's a different level of teaching and a different level of knowledge to something when you are expected and when you regularly do these things under duress. And there's a whole different level of performing a skill set when it's under duress. And for most people that practice any sort of, from EMS to, what you're talking about from critical flight nurse, it's all under duress. That's all there is. There's no, if it isn't, it's the exception to the rule. So I think that there's a different caliber of teaching that comes along with people that understand the stress levels that go along with this. And in turn, almost appreciate teaching this stuff without the stress level, but also know how to teach things in a way to simplify them, because they understand what it's like to try to do those things in a high stress situation and understand the necessity of either why order of things is so important. And they focus on teaching order of things so that you can memorize or remember what order that things go in. Simplify things like with a tourniquet and the way you leave the flap the way it is, because this is the fastest way to do it. Just simplified things that you only learn after repetition and doing things over and over. And these things prove themselves out. So I think it's invaluable, the things that, people like you can teach the rest of us, whether it be critical emergency care, or something like is monotonous, is like you were saying, just waste care, antibiotics, things like that are often kind of overlooked and certainly aren't as sexy because they're not the high stress, real fast situation type of thing. But the reality is they are of utmost importance to, and the reality is it's not just valuable in some sort of off-grid, post-apocalyptic, nightmare, or for some people, maybe their dream scenario. It wasn't, but not this last winter, but the winter before down here in Texas, when everything came to a complete standstill because there was a few inches of snow and the temperature dropped below what it normally did.
That was basically like a hell freezing over apocalypse moment for your average Texan, I believe.
It was crazy, and it was very simple things that went wrong. People lost water because pipes broke. People lost sewer. Then people didn't have enough food in there. And this was, Myles, this was not even a week. It was like less than a week and all of the snow was completely gone. But the damage can be done that quickly. And you can see, like, if the power had gone off, and it went off there for some people with that weather, but, just having power go off, or a hurricane or a tornado in different regions, these things can maybe not forever damage what's going on, but they do for a long enough time to where a lot of these things go from theory to necessity overnight.
Yeah, absolutely. And we can joke about it and we can make light about it. And, to be honest, when I first got introduced into the concept of prepping, it was a website called Zombie Hunters that I first found. And it was, probably 2007 old internet bulletin board. But the concept was, if you're ready for zombies, you're ready for anything, right? So, we should be able to have enough drinking water stored up to sustain ourselves and our family, to cook, to drink, to have basic hygiene functions. We need to have enough food stored up to feed ourselves. We need to have a firearm and some ammunition and kit and training to match that, to protect yourself. And it's the same thing with medical. And I find really interesting is, if you look anywhere on Instagram or YouTube, you'll find, 1,000 videos of, check out this, $3,500 rifle that I just bought. And, my tax stamp came in on my $1,400 suppressor. And, I have all this Gucci high-end tactical gear from Spirit Systems. I love Spirit Systems, but, by the way, where's your IFAK, bro? Yeah, right. Dude, that Fight Light chest rig is amazing. But yeah, like, where's your IFAK, bro? You gonna stuff a $38 Lancer magazine into that gut wound? I mean, what are you going to do? I mean, it's people will spend all kinds of money on their guns and their knives and their gadgets, but they overlook things like food storage and medical gear and medical training. Or they'll go out and they'll buy, $125 IFAK from my website, and then think that a PDF they downloaded on some questionable survival bulletin board is good enough to train them how to use everything in there. Look, teach your own, guys, but if I'm willing to go out and spend $200 on a concealed weapons permit class and a day at the range, why wouldn't I also want to be willing to spend some money to educate myself and also walk away from it with some good gear and good experience on medical knowledge too?
So let me throw this out there, Myles. I think a lot of people don't take medical classes because it's probably the same reason a lot of people don't go to firearms training, really. When you get down and you break down the numbers, yeah, they might talk a little bit about that, but it's less people go to the training than they want you to believe. I think people are intimidated. People are intimidated because they feel like, shoot, it's a stretch for me to put a Band-Aid on my own cut on my finger. You know what I mean? How in the world am I going to grasp these concepts? How am I going to react in this class? Am I going to be so overwhelmed that I can't? How do you overcome that with what you guys are doing? Because I think that's huge. It's hard to get outside of your comfort zone, because that's what it is for most of us. Dude, that might be your comfort zone, dude. That might be where you're at for you. But for most of us, that's way outside of the comfort zone. And it's really actually one of those things that's like people's worst nightmare, really. When that stuff happens, that's somebody's worst nightmare of a day. When you're in that field and you do that regularly, I don't think it probably is ever your comfort zone, Myles. But you know how to react, you know how to act, you know how to conduct yourself because you're accustomed to it. Where for the rest of us, like outsiders, dude, I don't even want to have to pull a sliver out of my finger.
Yeah, I get that. And I think we'll talk about this more a little bit in the latter half of the show. I almost got too comfortable with it, and that's why I'm in the process of a career change right now. But what I encourage people to really think about with this is everybody has to start somewhere. I'm a certified personal trainer as well, and a nutrition coach. I do that on the side, and I get a lot of anxiety with somebody the first time in the gym. But I'm sure that my first barbell back squat didn't look too pretty. I'm sure my first deadlift was ugly. I'm sure that my first clean and press didn't look too great either. So just remember, everybody had to start somewhere. Even though I'm standing up here at the front of this classroom with nearly 2 decades of experience under my own belt, and the rest of my cadre 10 to 20 years themselves, all of us were still that bright-eyed, brand new EMT on the ambulance on their very first shift. We've all been through it too. So what I will say is, at least on the medical side of things, in order to cope with the things that we do on a day-to-day basis, most of us are kind of goofy. So, we're pretty non-intimidating. We're all, giant teddy bear type people most of the time. But we try and combat that in the classroom with number one, having professional demeanors with our students. Number two, as educators, we remember what it was like the first time we learned how to apply a tourniquet or learned how to pack gauze into a wound or apply a splint or whatever the skill that we're talking about is. And then number three, that crawl, walk, run mentality where we gradually increase the intensity. I don't expect a lay rescuer or even a professional rescuer to come into my class day one and have a mastery of these skill sets. So with that in mind, if you're not in Arizona and you're looking to take this type of class, on top of looking at the pedigree and resume of your educators, you should also look how they act on social media. Look how they interact with people in public. You don't want some hot-headed jack donkey. I don't know if I can cuss on your show. You want somebody who's a real guy or a real gal who's going to treat you respectfully and make sure that you comfortably retain that information, because there's no benefit for me as an educator if you show up at my class and I'm acting like Arlie Ermy in Full Metal Jacket and I scare the heck out of you and you're nervous and not paying attention, and then you leave that class not mastering those skills. So number one, that's not doing a service to you, your family, or the public. And number two, that's not doing a service to me as a business owner, because you're not going to want to come back and take other classes with me. So make sure you're choosing people that not only have a great, well-rounded background, but are good public speakers, are respectable and decent people that know what it was like on day one. You know what I'm
saying? For sure, because it's intimidating. It can be, like I said, it can be intimidating to walk into something like that when you're not exactly sure what you're walking into. And despite how much you want to learn something, or even a lot of times I think people are going to the classes like that cold. It's not because they want to learn it. It's because they feel it's necessary for them to learn, see what's going on in the world around them. They know the love and the care that they feel for their family or their neighbors or their community or their group, and realize that, man, somebody's got to take responsibility here. I'm willing to step up and do it. But nonetheless, man, it's a big decision to make. You hit on something else I wanted to touch on too, Myles, and that was the necessity of the group. And I probably would have said this, but I had a real mentality and a real idea of self-reliance, right? We all kind of have this idea in our mind, this like, it's a lie. It's a lie. There's a lie of self-reliance that it rolls off of the tongue in our society these days for anybody that wants to do things differently or step away or whatever it might be, right? But it became very apparent in a very short amount of time when we had our little homestead there in Illinois that I couldn't do everything myself. Like, you physically can't do everything yourself. There's not enough hours in the day during different times of the year when this is going on or that's going on, and you have other responsibilities. And there were times where, one of the local farmers showed up and with his tractor and pulled a tree out of the way that had fallen down on some electrical wires or whatever, and were able to contribute without even me asking, in for them in the simplest of ways, but without the equipment, without the knowledge, without the humble desire to help these weird people that moved out into the country. We would have been a lot worse off than we were, So I'm really appreciative of the people that, despite our different approaches to things, like not spraying chemicals all over every single plant on our 2.5 acres, to, not sending our kids to school, to raising goats, all these things were like completely rejected and looked upon by the people in our area.
Oh man, you're I'm pretty sure your goats were instruments of Satan. I remember hearing all the stories on your podcast about how much you hated those things.
Yeah, but I had the last laugh, dude. They were delicious.
Yes, you did.
But Myles, I think creating whatever you're creating, whatever your idea is, it's got to be bigger than just you and yourself. And I think that the more relationships you can have, even if you live in a neighborhood, I should say, especially if you live in a neighborhood, or especially if you live in a condo or an apartment, the better relationship that you can have with your neighbors is detrimental to surviving, whether, again, like it be a hurricane or a flood or a freeze. Those things are detrimental. I remember when we had that little freeze there in Texas a couple years ago, and we were fine. We had just come off of, plenty of Illinois winter. So it was like a joke to us. But one of those days, my wife had gone over and asked our neighbor if they needed anything, and us having the ability to ask if our neighbors needed anything, if they had enough water, or if they needed some blankets, or if they needed some food or something like that, put us in a way different position in our community in that short time that we were in that neighborhood than had we been the ones asking for help, or whether we had just kept our door closed and didn't answer it if somebody came and knocked on it. So I think building rapport and building relationships with the people that are around you is maybe the most important step in all of this.
I absolutely agree. Obviously, I preach the concept of that mutual assistance group. You should be working on a small knit group of a couple of families that you know and you trust, and you're getting out in the woods and you're training in firearms handling and marksmanship, and you're training in basic medical skills and land navigation and shelter building, and that's very important, and it's something I talk a lot about in my classes and in my other podcast appearances. But the other side of that is our community as a whole, and that's actually one of the missions of my small business is, yay, cool, great. I made some money selling a trauma kit, or 10 people signed up for my class and I made a decent, side hustle. It's nice, right? But those people, because of the way we teach our class and because of the concepts that we talk about and because of those, we call them hip pocket conversations in the military, we'll sit around during a break in class, or we'll sit around together at lunch on both days, and we'll talk about, look, guys, the concept of a lone wolf is a BS concept. And we'll talk about the importance of forming your own groups. So somebody that might come to my class, yeah, they're getting the value of that trauma kit. They're getting the value of that education and that hands-on experience. But I can't tell you how many people will email me 2 or 3 months later and they'll say, hey, I went to my church. I'd like to have you come out here and do a Stop the Bleed class for everybody. I got a couple of the elders together and we're talking about doing some preparedness training in the church. Or, somebody else will email me and they'll say, hey, I went to my neighborhood and I set up like a neighborhood watch program. I learned that my next door neighbor is a retired dentist and another guy's really into ham radio. So we're starting to piece together our own little survival network. That just benefits you, right? So if you've got the barn full of the freeze-dried food and the guns and ammo, the more people in your community that you can get to start working together and preparing for themselves, the less likely you are to deal with that doomsday scenario of your neighbor showing up looking for food. Now, that said, I'm a Christian and I believe in charity, right? But that's one of the coolest parts, like an unintended consequence, I guess, of starting this business is watching how that preparedness movement is growing. And I give people very realistic expectations about it too. So it's pretty cool watching that unfold and evolve.
Yeah, and the more value you can add to your neighbors right now, the better position you'll be in when things go bad, and that can happen at any time, whether, you live in an area where, there's snow or hurricanes or tornadoes or floods, stuff can happen at any time, all the time. And taking some basic steps for yourself and for your community can make all the difference between, surviving or thriving during that time. It's huge. It's looking at things bigger than yourself. When we get into this myopic view of ourself and we can take care of everything, it's always unhealthy. There's a reason why we as human beings are very, very social creatures and tell stories and share things and give things. And because we need that. That's how God developed and wanted us to be. So, and the funny thing is there's a reason why that wolf is on a lot of the things that I do. And it's for that idea, that mentality, because the whole idea of a lone wolf is a crazy concept that who knows where that came from, right? Because the lone wolf, he got shunned from his community. He got shunned from his tribe, and he's been pushed out. And rarely do those wolves ever survive very long because they cannot survive alone. They are a very social creature, just like we are as human beings. So the better that we can understand that and accept it, I should say, the better off we'll be. And the sooner that you can start committing to these conversations in your church or your community, or start giving your community and becoming of value in your community, the better off. You don't want to wait till things get any more sideways than they already are, Myles.
Oh, absolutely. And that's almost a good segue into the next part of the show here is, the concept of that lone wolf mentality. And that's kind of a great way to talk about where I've been for the last year and a half. So, sometimes you're a lone wolf because you get shunned by your society. And sometimes you're a lone wolf because an event in your life or series of events, as what happened to me, are so devastating to you that you really have to pick and choose what matters. And sometimes that's healthy and sometimes that's not healthy. And if you're anything like me, I think a lot of men, when either it's our pride that's hurt or our heart that's hurt, what do we tend to do? We tend to wall off and we tend to disappear. So here's your teaser, folks. Where has Archangel Dynamics been for the last 2 years, year and a half, 2 years, however long it's been? So I'm going to be very careful with what I say here because I don't at all want to badmouth the mother of my children. My kids may hear this podcast at some point, but My ex-wife left me and ran off with a woman and started a new life on her own at the end of 2020. Coincidentally, those that saw my Instagram and my Facebook, and you saw me post the picture of that Rudyard Kipling book, and I quoted the entire poem of If. That was the day it all started. Divorce has been finalized. We're moving on with our lives. Again, I will never say anything ill towards the mother of my kids. That's not what this is about. That's just what started I don't know what you want to call it, a journey of self-discovery, a journey of healing, a journey of re-sparking my faith. So many things have happened over the last 18 months. It started with that devastating divorce. And then when that happened and I had to kind of take a step back from my business and some other things in personal life and friends, and really had to start focus on what does my life look like now? How do I prioritize taking care of my children? How do I learn how to co-parent when you live 240 miles apart? There was a lot of learning that had to be done. So I guess that's a good jumping point into where do we as men, how do I phrase this? So folks, this is super off the cuff. If you've ever listened to any podcast I've been on, you know that I don't believe in script. Joe and I basically said, hey, we're going to just take this wherever we take it today. So how do I want to phrase this? I'm sure a lot of men listening have been through the pain of a divorce. And there's no metric to my divorce is worse than your divorce, or your divorce is worse than my divorce, or I only have 2 children, so it's less painful than the person that has 10 children, or whatever. Divorce freaking sucks. I don't care how you cut it. It sucks. Especially when there's an element of betrayal added to the mix as well. Divorce really sucks. And I think that a lot of men make some very foolish choices after divorce. I'm sure women do too, but as a, what's the politically correct term? As a penis owner, because I can't say as a man anymore. So as a penis owner, I cannot speak on the behavior of a vagina owner. Who would have thought we would live in this world, Joe, right? As a man, I can only speak to what men do. And, I'm sure it's no big secret that in the military and in first responder circles, divorce rates are through the roof. So I've seen plenty of men make very foolish choices. I've seen them, go on a rampage and slander their ex-spouse and end up losing lots of money as a result of that. And even worse than that, when they have children, damaging their children and damaging their children's views of mommy because of things that daddy said. I've seen men turn to alcohol and drugs. I've seen men fall into a den of sexual debauchery. I've seen it all. Either coworkers of mine that have gone through it, or people that have called 911 because they've hit rock bottom and they're suicidal and they need someone to talk to and they need help. So, I licked my wounds for a couple of weeks, thinking anyone would. I definitely reclused. But I took the last 18 months, 2 years-ish of my life to really think about the man that I wanted to be after my divorce. Another really common mistake that people make, and I think especially men, because we're so prideful, is that we say, oh, I got divorced. My life is over. My legacy is over. Especially me. I'm almost 37. I've got 2 kids. I was married nearly 14, 15 years. That's a huge culture shock. That's a big shock going from, going to sleep next to somebody and waking up next to them every morning and having your kids greet you at the door to you get the kids half the time, and now that relationship with this person that you once loved is now completely changed. It's a big shock. And a lot of men have so much of their identity wrapped up in their marriage that when that marriage falls apart, it completely implodes the rest of their life. And a lot of men never recover from it. Men, they, like I said, they'll turn to alcohol or drugs or sexual sin or whatever their vice of choice is, and they just never recover from it. And very early, I decided that my priorities were going to be my children, my relationship with the Lord, my own physical and mental health, and finding a way to move past this really big stumbling block in my life and still prosper and carry on and continue my legacy. So obviously putting the kids first, I got into therapy very early in this divorce. And this is also a good time to mention, men, stop being stubborn. There's no shame in seeing a therapist. There's no shame in being depressed and having a major life crisis. There's no shame in needing to take an antidepressant for a few months. There's no shame in learning how to co-parent, in learning. One of the most important things to me through the process of this divorce was honoring my feelings of anger and betrayal without harming my kids. It's so many men and women get so toxic after their divorce that they weaponize their kids and they say things in front of their kids they should never say. I don't ever want my children to hear something bad about their mother. They should never. And I hope that they would never hear anything bad about their father at the other household involved too. And, it's important to learn those skills. How do I deal with this hurt while protecting my kids? And then, of course, as I started diving into that, I started to realize, crap, I've never talked to a therapist before in my life. And I've got, everybody's got their childhood trauma and everyone's got their college and young adult trauma. But I'm a combat veteran, and I've been a firefighter. I've worked in law enforcement. I've worked on an ambulance and a helicopter. I've worked in trauma centers. And I've got all of this crap shoved away in a hole in my mind, and it's never been addressed. So what started out as, how do I handle a person that I was married to that was one of the biggest priorities of my life? How do I move past that? That then started me down the pathway of, that was a traumatic experience. Myles, you have the right to be upset and depressed and anxious about that. Let's talk about healthy ways to deal with that. But you've got all of this other horrible trauma that you've been holding close and not letting anybody touch. How do we fix that? So I know a lot of your listeners are believers. Guys, gals, if there are women listening, there are a ton of therapists who are faith-based. And I can't tell you how much of a blessing it has been having a therapist who not only specializes in divorce and in trauma therapy, but also specializes in presenting that from a Christian perspective. There are so many truths that we remember from Awana and Vacation Bible School and all the little Bible verses and things we memorize as kids. And then we become adults and we have a career and we get married and we have kids, and they all kind of fall by the wayside. And then we become stubborn idiot men and we say, I don't need to give this trauma to the Lord. I can just shove it into a hole. And that's where things really started falling apart. Is I ran out of space in my buckets. There's a therapy, a tool we use in therapy called the bucket method, right? There's an important concept, man, called resiliency. Yes, we need to be resilient. In the middle of a firefight is not the time to go, gee, this is traumatic. I need to have a heart-to-heart and pray and deal with this trauma. In the middle of resuscitating somebody who's been shot in the head, or in the middle of a childbirth with a baby who's born in cardiac arrest, or all these other awful things that I've had to go through, you have to have that resiliency within you to say, I got to put this in a bucket for right now because I have to do my dang job. But the problem becomes we rely on ourselves too much and those buckets fill up. And let's say you've only got 10 buckets. Bucket number 1 is full of childhood trauma. Bucket number 2 is full of early adult trauma. Bucket 2, 3, and 4 are full of all of my combat trauma. And then bucket 5, 6, and 7, and 8, and 9 are full of all of my trauma of being a paramedic. And then now we're in bucket 10 and boom, divorce. Boom. Very traumatic year. Boom. COVID pandemic. I'm watching people die left, right, and center in the back of my ambulance. It piles up and starts overflowing. You have to be able to get a grasp on it. And that's what I have been focusing on the last year is my own mental health, processing that trauma, and then my physical health. And we can kind of dive into that. I need a drink of water after that dialogue. So, Joe, if you want to take it for a second, I would appreciate you.
Yeah, no problem, Myles. And this is something that I've been talking about and keying in on a lot lately is this idea of when we have chaos in our life, and there's always chaos. We live in a world filled with chaos. It's just sometimes that chaos is not as close to us as at other times. It's always there. It just doesn't affect us always in the same way. And sometimes something traumatic happens and some of the chaos that's always been right outside your door now all of a sudden is more real because of something else that you're going through. And I think this is exactly where we're going with this, Myles. But there's only 2 directions to deal with chaos. And the one path that you go down is sedation. And like you were talking about, sabotage, where so many of these men that you work with were completely sabotaging their own lives, right? Or sedating their lives, numbing themselves to what was going on. And the unfortunate problem is that if you don't catch that sedation, or you can't stop that sabotage, far too often those 2 things go down an even darker path of suicide if we're not careful. But the opposite of that, and I think this is what made a tremendous help for you, is the ideas of routine and tradition. And routine and tradition become like the mast. If you hear some of these stories of like these old ships, the old wood ships with the sails on them, and they would go through these tremendous storms in the ocean. And at times the storms were so bad that they would tie themselves to these mast posts so that, because there was nothing to hold on to, there was no safety. And I believe that tradition and routine can be like tying yourself to that mast post. It gives you something constant. It gives you something to hold on to. It gives you something that you have control over in this chaos that's surrounding you. And you can kind of take it from there if you think that's true or not. But that's something that I've been seeing more and more as something that all of us can do. All of us are capable of creating a routine in our lives. All of us are capable of creating tradition amongst ourselves and amongst our family that's just ours. And the more that we do that, the better off we'll be. Do you find that to be true, Myles? Because you are just coming through probably one of the most chaotic, difficult, tough spots that I know of anybody going through.
Oh, absolutely. And the craziness is that the rough spot didn't just end with that divorce and a very real realization that it was time to start working on my mental health. So controlling what we can control. Okay. So what did that look like for me? What that looked like for me was starting with very small steps. If you've ever had a deeply depressive spell, it is a victory to even get out of bed sometimes. It is a victory to remember to shower or brush your teeth. It is a victory to, after 4 hours of sitting there going, I am really dang hungry. I need to get off of this couch and go eat food. So I started to focus on what I can control, because those of you that are listening that have been through a divorce, it's hell. It's chaos. You don't know what happens to your visitation with your kids. You don't know how long you have them, who gets them, how long, where they go. Finances are in flux. You don't know what happens to your house. You don't know what happens to anything. And they're drawn out and they're scary and they're overwhelming. So I figured I can't control any of that crap. What can I control? So started slow. It started with, I'm going to focus on getting out of bed before 7 o'clock in the morning on the days I'm not at work. Doesn't mean I'm not going to go walk out to the kitchen, have a cup of coffee, and then still fall asleep on the couch, but it's a step, right? Then it became, I'm going to make sure I'm eating properly. Then it became, I'm going to make sure I'm sleeping properly, which is funny because, these are all things that a personal trainer would tell their clients to do. But it even shows that those of us that know better, when we enter a crisis state, sometimes we need that to kick ourselves in the butt to get out of that. Then that got into focusing. I already mentioned I was focusing very heavily on my mental health. I started prioritizing my physical health. And I took it to the point of not just regularly going to the gym, but I now compete regularly with APF, American Powerlifting Federation, and with Strongman Corporation. So powerlifting is a static strength sport. It tests your max effort squat, bench, and deadlift. And then strongman is a mix of dynamic and static events. Sometimes it's a max deadlift. Sometimes you're picking up 1,000-pound yoke and carrying it 50 feet. Sometimes you have to load big concrete stones onto a platform. It's also a strength sport, but it's a little bit more dynamic. And I found that by giving myself something to look forward to, it sucked when I got into it, right? Nobody likes squatting 315 pounds for 8 sets of 5 reps. It sucks. You can't walk for a day afterwards, right? But then it became, hey, this is a safe place to exercise some very real and very heavy and very dark emotions. I'm safe in this gym. I can grab this barbell and I can deadlift 500 pounds from the floor and slam it into the platform and do it over and over and over again till maybe you vomit, but you get to kind of face those demons head on in a safe place. Then that evolved into, I'm actually looking forward to this. Then that evolved into, what is a man if he is not setting goals in his life and trying to achieve those goals and trying to leave a legacy? So you train for a competition, you work your butt off for months and months and months and months for your 15 minutes of fame on that platform. And then all of a sudden, hey, I'm breaking strength records. Hey, I'm breaking personal bests. Hey, last week I was only able to bench 245 pounds. This week I hit 270. You're seeing your work unfolding right in front of you. And it's a really cool thing. And it's a really healthy thing to do, not just when you're in crisis, but in general. So I spent a lot of time in the gym. And then when I was there, I started meeting other people that were also going through some pretty devastating things. Some of the closest friends I have are in my powerlifting and strongman circles. There are people with drug abuse backgrounds that are sober and turned to powerlifting to keep them clean. There are people with just horrific childhoods filled with sexual and physical abuse and have turned to powerlifting as a place to keep them from making poor decisions and from dwelling on that. And yes, they're still getting professional help and they're still healing, but this has given them a safe place to deal with these heavy emotions. Men and women that have escaped abusive relationships, people who are no longer turning to an alcohol bottle. I don't think there's anything wrong with having a beer or having a glass of whiskey here and again, but to take it to excess, I believe, is sinful, right? It's really cool. And a lot of these people are Christians or have come to know Christ through knowing me and knowing the other people in this powerlifting circle at my gym. And it's become like a home away from home almost. So I was progressing. I was working through therapy. I was working through iron therapy at the gym. And last November is actually the day before Thanksgiving. This is where things really came to a head. I slipped and fell into a ditch on a 911 call. I was at work, and I slammed down onto my left kneecap. Now, I'm very, very strong. I'm 6 foot tall, about 250 pounds. Very strong guy, but there's a big difference between setting up for a max effort squat in the gym where there's 450, 500 pounds on a barbell, and you've got your sleeves and your power belt, and you've been warming up for 45 minutes, and you have spotters, and you're recovered, and you're ready to move that weight. There's a difference between that and injuring yourself at work, where out of the blue, boom, something happens. I went off into this ditch. I dropped down onto my left knee. I felt a pop. And 3 hours later, I was dragging myself into the emergency room, still on shift. So ended up tearing my meniscus. I tore my MCL, and I partially tore my ACL in my right knee. So here I was managing the stress of divorce and single parenthood with physical exertment. And now I can't squat and I can't deadlift.
Your football career was over.
Yeah. Well, at the moment, yeah. So it was a real big, I even looked up at God and I'm like, really, man? Like, I finally find this like really healthy way to help process this. And now this happens. What's the one thing I didn't mention I was focusing on, Joe? I mentioned I was focusing on mental health and putting my children first, and I was focusing on my physical well-being. What was I still not focusing on?
Yeah, your faith.
My faith. God does not hurt his children, but I do believe that, in fact, it even says so in the word. It says that God will make good of a bad situation. I'm paraphrasing probably 19 verses because you know how the Bible likes to quote itself, and the prophets quote other prophets, and the apostles quote the Old Testament. So take your pick at whatever 19 verses that was there, right? So I had a moment of crap. I've been keeping myself busy at work. I've been keeping myself busy at the gym. Now I can't work on the ambulance anymore. I can't work on the helicopter anymore. And I can be a gym bro and just do biceps and chest, which, believe me, I still did. But I couldn't squat or deadlift. And those were two of my favorite lifts. And it really kind of forced me to come to terms with a couple of things. And one of the things that came out of that was that day started my spiritual regrowth. And it started slow. It started with, boom, I'm going to humble you with this moment. I'm going to force you to look inward, and I'm going to force you to look upward. Boom, the job that you have worked your entire adult life, it's over. Boom, I'm going to force you behind a desk and force you to face what you've been hiding from. And my employer, I can't name the employer on this podcast, but I will say I'm very, very grateful to my employer. They found a position for me. I worked in clinical education. I taught a lot. I did a lot of like chart reviews. Paramedics, we go on a 911 call, we have to write our chart. So I got to do a lot of mentoring with younger EMTs and paramedics and coaching and stuff. So they still found a place for me. And then something else happened that I'm not allowed to talk about right now. And when we have podcast 2 about this, we will talk about. But that absolutely caused the rest of my world to implode around me. And it finally forced me to say, hey, you big idiot. What's the one thing, the one person who you have not been crying out to? Yeah, it's not like I stopped praying and stopped reading the Bible through this, but I was still relying on myself an awful lot. And I was relying on friends, and yeah, I think there's value in that too. But what was I not doing? I wasn't putting this at the foot of the cross. I wasn't crying out before God and saying, I am humbled and I am broken. Wash me, pick me up, and put me back together. So that's where we kind of come full circle. So here we are a couple of months after that major knee injury and still wading through some bad stuff. Knee has been recovered. I did not need surgery. The MCL reattached itself to my tibia. My ACL healed. MCL, it still has a small tear. It'll heal over time. I'm deadlifting again. Squat is slowly recovering. But I'm going to church again. And I'm paying more attention to what I put into my body and what I put into my ears and what I let come out of my mouth again. You know, when you're in the gym and you're deadlifting heavy and you're doing a heavy overhead press, yeah, sure, Rammstein, heavy metal, go nuts. But I'm now choosing what goes in my ears and what I meditate in my heart outside of that. I'm listening to worship music again. I'm following a proper devotional. I'm really diving deep back into the Word of God. I'm looking at ways I can begin ministering. I'm looking at ways I can begin volunteering in the church. If anything came out of the absolute hell that I have just emerged from, and there's more to it that not only I can't talk, there are other elements I'm not comfortable talking about yet because it's still too acute. But if there's anything that came out of this, it is that I am spiritually stronger and I am physically stronger and I am healthier. And that is going to give me a healthy, long life. That's going to let me be here for my children. And that's going to let me be here not only physically for them, but as a spiritual leader of my household for them.
It's awesome, Myles. I mean, nobody said this life that we were in was going to be easy. And I think it's this modern concept. I was just on a podcast with Dave Brixis, and so he was talking about that, how we've created this culture where we try to avoid and even protect other people from the difficulties in life. And when we do that, we create people that struggle that much more when we do encounter those difficulties, when we haven't had had to exercise that faith muscle in the past to get us out, or haven't had to understand the role that routine played, or understand the role that having the right people played, or have understanding those things. And when you get blindsided completely and utterly and totally the way that you did, and you're trying to reinvent a lot of things at the same time, it puts us in so much weaker and so much more of a difficult spot than had we prepared for that stuff as much as we were preparing for some extra food storage and water filters and things like that, you know. And I absolutely appreciate you sharing this, Myles, and being so vulnerable, because we also live in a day where vulnerability on one hand is valued, but on the other hand is completely and totally feared, because we live in a day and age where we're all petrified that if we should share something that's vulnerable, somebody could hear it, and somebody might say this or somebody might do that. And so we have this whole world filled with people that are going through difficulties and going through hard times, and they're scrolling through Facebook and Instagram and seeing this highlight reel where everybody else is hiding from the reality of their life. And all it does is create a bunch of people that feel alone and feel that they're struggling all by themselves. And I appreciate you sharing and being so vulnerable and honest, because there are a lot of men out there going through awful situations. Maybe worse, maybe not as bad. It doesn't matter. We're all going to go through struggles and difficulties in our lives, and we can learn so much from the valuable lessons that Myles is learning here. Just like we were talking about teaching the medical stuff, right? It's your experience. It's the fact that you've done these things under stress 1,000 times that gives you the ability to teach it. So who is better at teaching how to deal with the chaos of life? Who is better at directing people on how to deal with the trauma left by divorce? Who is better to do this stuff than the people that have experienced it and the people that are going through it? Yet so many of them are afraid to speak up. So many of them are afraid to share. So many of them are afraid to expose that things aren't quite the way that they want them to appear. So I applaud you for sharing and for being honest about who you are, the struggles that you've gone through these last couple of years, the battles, but also the tips and the tricks. I shouldn't say tips and tricks, but hey, I'll call them that anyway, that helped you focus and helped you gain some sort of traction and footing. Because I know what you're saying about depression. There's been times in my life where it's like I could physically, and I remember having this conversation with you, where you almost feel the tug at your toe. You know what I mean? It's pulling you down. And if you're conscientious about yourself and what you're going through in life, you can feel it. You can feel it when that alarm goes off in the morning, trying to hold you down in the bed, and it's not easy. And like you said, and I appreciate so much you saying, sometimes it's only the getting out of bed before 7. Okay, I'll get out of bed before 7. And I believe it's the same with creating a routine. It's got to be, number one, it's got to be realistic for where you are today. It's got to be realistic, and it's got to be something that you're able to maintain for the foreseeable future. Start with that. And if all it is getting out of bed, awesome. Good for you. Do it. You can always add to it. It's better to add to your routine and to add to your self-discipline than take away. Because when you start taking away because you're not able to live up to those expectations, you start taking away things. And when you get in the habit of that, that's an awful habit to get into. We want to be adding because it's building you up. It's building your character. You're feeling better about yourself. It's empowering. And you feel like you have some control over something. When you can't live up to those expectations that you set for yourself because they were unrealistic, it's defeating as can be, man. It is painful because not only did you not do what you wanted to do, but you lied to yourself, and now you can't forgive yourself. Now you have one more thing to be upset with yourself about. And what do you have to say too? I think it's so important, Myles, to sometimes give yourself some grace and give yourself some space to grow, because I know you and I've known you before this. And I know, dude, that you are a hard driver, dude. You are a pusher. You are an all-in kind of guy. I know that you had crazy long commutes and you were buying new property, and dude, you were 1,000,000 miles an hour, always pedal to the floor kind of guy. And when you get broken down completely and utterly and totally, how do you build that back up again? How do you do that when you're driven?
So I've actually been struggling with like, how do I continue telling more of my story? And he just gave me a really great segue right there. So I appreciate that. So there's an expression that we use often in the military, and that expression is that war burns the fat off of your soul. And what that expression means is so few people join the military. Out of those people that do join the military, very few actually see real, no BS combat. And for those of us that have been in that position where you've got rounds flying overhead, where you got IEDs exploding and blasting shrapnel at your truck, or whatever horrible things that you've had to go through, the concept of war burning the fat off of your soul is it forces you to look at your life and say, what am I holding on to that is BS? It serves no purpose. It's not edifying or glorifying to the Lord. It doesn't strengthen me physically, mentally, spiritually. It doesn't benefit me as a community member, as a leader of my community, as a family leader, as a father. And I can be completely honest, what I have just emerged from was easily darker than the period of time I had before I came back or after I came back from Iraq. And I remember that old saying, war burns the fat off of your soul. And in many ways, divorce can kind of be like a war if you make it that way, if you're a jerk. But I how do you rebuild yourself? You look at yourself and you say, what matters? And I've decided to really look at my life and really just take a scalpel to it and cut away crap that was just dragging me down. And, I over the last however many months this has been, I've cut off toxic friendships. I've set up boundaries with people. I've set up boundaries with my ex-wife. I've set up boundaries within my family. I've set up boundaries even with my best friends. And, guys, I'm not, setting up boundaries. It sounds like some she hippie. Oh, I'm a man. I don't want to talk about that. It's important. You got to learn to stay up for yourself and know your own self-worth. And how you rebuild is you number one, you heal and you take it seriously and you realize whether it's a divorce, whether it's a bad breakup, whether it's a serious injury that ends or changes your career, which is what happened. All of the above, happened to me. You say, I'm going to heal from this trauma and I'm going to also address previous trauma. I'm going to heal from it. And then you say, I'm going to be as healthy as I can physically. And then you say, I'm going to shove my face back into the Word of God. And then you say, I am a leader in my community. If I'm going to have some big changes in my life, how do I lead? And I don't say this to toot my own horn, and it's very difficult to say things like this from a place of humility. There's not a lot of flight paramedics out there. There's not a lot of people that have been to war. I'm very, very proud of my accomplishments and the many things I've done in my life. But it's time to start walking away. I retired from flight at the end of last year. I retired from the ambulance 8 days ago. So in my journey forward, here's what this is going to look like. I'm going to go work private practice, probably as a personal trainer in a men's health clinic or physical therapist's office. I am going to, much as I said that I've changed what I put into my ears and I changed what I meditate in on my heart. Joe, I'm broken. I'm not saying this to get sympathy or gore porn or anything like that. I'm done. I'm done hearing people scream in pain. I'm done watching people die. I'm done pronouncing people dead. I'm done dragging dead bodies out of cars. I'm done. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to choose to stop putting that trauma in front of me anymore. So I'm going to go work private practice. I'm going to work for a physician's office, might work outpatient at a hospital somewhere. And I'm going to go back to school. I'm going to go to grad school. I'm going to become a physician assistant. And I'm going to open a men's health practice. That's my dream, is I want to do a men's health practice. Not just boner pills and testosterone injections, like injury recovery and personal training and nutrition guidance and the whole 9 yards. I want to have a holistic approach to men's health out of my practice in a couple of years after I graduate. And that's really what I took out of this, is I had to piece all of this together by myself. I wish there was a one-stop shop where men could go and not just get, an annual checkup and a blood draw for their testosterone level, but also, hey, you're struggling with mental health. Let me refer you to somebody. Hey, you're overweight. Hey, you're underweight. You want to gain weight for your sport. Let me show you how to do both of those in a healthy way. The other side of that is, how do I take this experience that I have been through? And you hit the nail on the head there, Joe. Who better to talk to people who are going through the trauma of a divorce? Who better to talk to young EMTs and paramedics and nurses and doctors and police officers about what we go through? So I started as a whim on TikTok, and I'm ultimately going to transition this into a podcast. Boy, Joe, your listeners are getting a lot of big announcements. Myles is retired from field EMS. Myles is now a single dad. Myles is going to launch a podcast. You're lucky that you're the first podcast I went on. You're getting all the tea, all the exclusive juice. Okay, so I started it on TikTok, and the reason I started it on TikTok is I knew it'd be a very easy way to just quickly shoot a video and boom, upload it and get my story out there. And the project is called Whiskey and War Stories. And I have one glass of whiskey because, again, I don't believe there's anything wrong with responsibly enjoying a drink from time to time. And it starts out kind of lighthearted. Hey, this is Tullamore Dew, and it's one of my favorite Irish whiskeys. It's a rye whiskey, and I like it because it has a nice, oat finish to it and blah, blah, blah. And then we quickly transition from the whiskey sommelier. By the way, that's another thing I did just for fun. I'm now a whiskey sommelier. So just like there's wine sommeliers that can grade wines. Hey, men, if you're listening and you want to learn about bourbon, Scotch, or Irish whiskey, I'm your guy. I did that just for fun, Anyway, so I transitioned from that, and then I talk about very traumatic events in my career as a paramedic. There's some lighthearted stories on there, because this is also me kind of decompressing and coming terms to the fact that my life is changing. So much like I had to come to terms with, I'm no longer married to this woman anymore, and the divorce, I had to come to terms with that. I now have to come to terms with, I'm no longer Billy Badass flight paramedic. I'm no longer saving lives on the ambulance. So I'm also trying to document some of my fun memories on this TikTok project as well, because it's almost like a sounding board. So if you do want to go check it out, I will warn you, the stories are unbelievably graphic. I do not pull punches, and I'm doing this on purpose. Number one, the public doesn't have a clue what we go through, and I'm hoping to elicit a good discussion with the public, because what has happened to healthcare workers after COVID is disgusting. I have never in my career, look, I don't do what I do for the accolades or the pat on the back, 10% off our books. I don't. But I also did become a paramedic to be verbally and physically assaulted. And since COVID has happened, paramedics and nurses, we have been treated like absolute crap. So the first part of this is I'm hoping to create a dialogue with the public to say, look, we're here to help you. Please understand what we're going through. Hey, when you call me at 2:00 in the morning for your toothache that should see a dentist, not an ER doctor, understand what I probably have already been through in the day. Okay. The second part of this is I've gotten so tired through the years of, oh, you're a paramedic. It must be awful. What's your worst story? And again, I don't do it for sympathy, and I don't believe in, glorifying what I do or gore porn or any of that. But people deserve to know. And I'm at a point in my own mental health recovery where I can start talking about this. And it's actually, in a lot of ways, therapeutic. And the third is, as a leader in my community, the community of emergency medicine, as a leader and as a mentor, I am trying to open a dialogue, because just like in the military, there's a lot of BS bravado. There's a lot of it in the fire service and police service and emergency medicine. Oh, yeah, sure. We just body bagged a 4-year-old we pulled out of a hot tub. I'm just fine. I don't need to talk about it. And then 15, 16, 17 years later, you have a breakdown like I did at the end of last year, and it really forced a career change. So what I'm hoping to do by sharing these awful stories is encourage other first responders to be vulnerable and honest and seek help. I've also told some of my stories about getting help and what that looks like and pointing people to resources. I want to break this stigma that just because you're a quote unquote hero or a quote unquote badass, that you can't have a weak moment or a series of weak moments or come to a point where you just can't do it anymore and you have to change things. And I need to break this down because I still hear it all the time. One of my supervisors, after just an awful call that I had, it was a double fatality. There were 2 infants ejected from their car that we had to stabilize and fly out from the scene. Their father was killed in the collision. It was awful. I went home after that. I said, hey, this is enough for one day. I'm not dealing with anything else today. I'm sorry you're short paramedics. I need to take care of me, and I need to go hug my kids, and I need to go have a cup of tea, and I need to kind of regroup after that. And my manager, I'm not going to name this person or put them under the bus. My manager just looks at me and goes, well, it is kind of what we signed up for, isn't it? And that is the culture I'm trying to break. And that is why I've started that project. And the kind of cool thing about it is, we do our little hashtags. It's on TikTok, has hashtags. I started clicking on my own hashtag where it says hashtag whiskey and war stories. And it's slowly growing. There's a police officer who's doing the same thing. He pours a glass of Jack and Coke and tells a story. There is another flight paramedic who is telling stories. There's 2 or 3 firefighters that are telling stories. One of my closest friends, she wasn't comfortable doing videos, but she started a blog, and she is now, through writing, that's her way of expressing this, is telling her stories. So the movement is starting to grow. And my hope is that it will, number one, encourage us in the first responder community to seek help and speak up. It'll educate the public a little bit more about what we really do and what we have to put up with. And it will encourage other people. One of the firefighters that took my idea and started doing these videos is a battalion chief at his fire department. And he told me he is now looking into better resources for his firefighters. I can't express to you how cool that is, that an idea that I had one day, and really what started it is I was looking for a necklace. Yes, I wear jewelry. Get over it, men. Okay, I was looking for a necklace, and I found a cross necklace my mother had given to me before I went to Iraq, and it had a Bible verse inscribed on it. And I told the story about how my mother gave me that cross and how I wore it in Iraq And then I went and I wore it in Afghanistan as a private military contractor, and I wore it in Syria and Kosovo and all these other places that I've gotten to go. It was always in my pants pocket. And it started off of that, and now the page has 3,000 followers, and the movement is growing, and people are telling their stories, and it's really rewarding that what I wanted to happen is actually happening. So I'm going to take it into a podcast now, but it's a kind of a neat little project, and it's cool. Yeah, it's cool.
Love it, man. You know, you hear your story and what you've gone through, especially with the career stuff. And for so many, that's devastating because it's a loss of an identity. And I think that the more badass of something that you do, it becomes more of your identity. It's who you are, because when you are a part of an elite segment of society, because of the expectations and the way that you operate together and things like that, it creates a different culture, and you become a part of that culture. And it becomes it's a good thing that it becomes a part of your identity. You know, we can focus on these things becoming a negative because at some point maybe they do, or maybe, but as a social people, as a tribal people, we need those things, and we need to feel that we are a part of a group. And that's the good parts of that. But it can also be twisted into something that's difficult to separate yourself from. So seeing you be able to lose an identity, but it seems like in losing that identity, you've gained a different purpose. You've gained a purpose that's bigger than you, and a drive for something that's bigger than just being a part of that culture.
Yeah, absolutely. And this kind of comes full circle. You know, what does the scripture tell us? My identity is in Christ.
Yeah.
The Lord gives us a calling, and I've been very blessed to follow that calling. And I can definitively say there are hundreds of people who would not be alive today had I not followed that calling. But my identity is a lot more than my spouse. My identity is a lot more than the patch on my shoulder. My identity is a lot more than however many babies you've delivered in a ditch, right? You know, my identity is in the Lord. And moving forward, what I plan on doing is, obviously we're bringing the business back out of the dust. We're launching some cool new stuff with the business. I'm going to launch this podcast. And I'm going to find some way to take this and minister. I don't know if that means helping out with grief counseling at the church. I don't know if that means starting an outreach for PTSD in the church, you know, whether it's from military or being a first responder, or guys, you don't have to go to combat at PTSD. I have friends that have PTSD from sexual abuse. I have friends that have PTSD from a bad car accident. Maybe that's where God's leading me, is to minister to people like that. I had a discussion with the discipleship pastor at my church, and I said, I don't know what to do, but I can't shake this feeling that I am supposed to minister in some way. So we're going to keep talking through together and see what comes of that. But I don't know, maybe the ministry is the podcast. Who knows? I'm going to just kind of, just like I've had to do every single day since this started, I'm going to just have to take a leap of faith and see where it goes.
And I think that's key to everything, Myles. It is taking that step, because we, in our minute knowledge and vision of what could possibly happen, is so small compared to, like I said, gaining a purpose in a direction, and where you can take it doesn't really matter. Where it's going to go doesn't really matter. The results of that down the line, you know, one thing that I say like about my coaching is it's not getting to the end of the program that sees results. It's the paying attention in the middle of the program that gets the results. We get so caught up in and maybe this is how human beings have always been, right? You're always waiting to the end, right? Because in the movies, in the books, everything, there's some sort of resolution, whether positive or negative, at the end, right? Any story that somebody's telling around the campfire, right? It's always the end, right? So we tend to want to get to the end because we think that there's a resolution or that there's some finality at the end. But the reality is, in life, it's what's in between the beginning and the end, or that really matters. At some point, I want to have a discussion with you. And one thing that I've been talking a lot about on this podcast since I switched over and started doing Heroes Wanted is this idea that there are 3 challenges that we must face in life to truly rise above and make and course correct or start down a path of growth. And that's fear, lies, and the expectations of others. And I think in our conversation that we've had, you've named all 3 of those things that were major things that you overcame in order to get to where you are today. So at some point down the line, let's have that discussion about fears, lies, and expectations of others, because to me, that is something that if we can put a name on what it is that we're facing, if we can for me, I like to put a face on what I'm facing, whether it's a monster or a troll or whatever dark beast that I'm fighting in the middle of that arena, the more visceral and the more real that I can make that battle and that challenge, the more that I can have the ability to face down what I need to face, So I would love to talk to you, just breaking down your situation into those 3 things. And maybe it would be something that you working through those 3 ideas in your mind would be helpful to hear other people and go, yeah, but this is where I dealt with the fear, and here's expectations of others. Because I think until we face those 3 things, especially, and there's always, for each of us, there's little things along the way, right? Because we're all individual and gone through different things. But I think those 3 beasts are ones that we will all have in common as we try to change direction and change course in our life.
Yeah, Joe, I'd really like that. So I'm not a stranger to your program. I'm happy to come back, and I didn't really think about it that way, but I guess I really have been kind of navigating all of that since this started. That might be a good idea for a book collaboration. We'll talk offline.
Yeah, for sure, dude. I'll be honest with you, Myles. I was just talking, like I said, I was just on, I believe the name of the podcast is Real Man Podcast with Dave Brixis. He's like a coach. I believe he mostly like a speed coach, been in business for 20 years. Right there, you might not know somebody very well, but when they can have a milestone, like they've ran their own coaching business for speed coach and sports business for 20 years, to me, that's big props, big respect to this guy. And I can't remember where I was going with that.
Well, Joe, it's been a long day for both of us. I think it's okay if the brain train left the station without you, because I know mine did too. No, I think that's a really cool way of looking at it. So you said fear, lies, and expectation of others, huh?
Yeah.
I'd say let's make a bumper sticker, but that's not cool enough.
We'll figure out something. Oh, but
we'll figure something out.
I remember what I was going to say, Myles. It was this. he asked me on the podcast what one of my biggest failures was. And so I have no problem sharing my failures because I got a long list. And in fact, I have no problem stacking failures. I've come to that point in my life where I can understand stacking my failures. So, but it's a rough question to just get thrown at you, right? But my answer really was Ever Vigilant. And you know firsthand what Ever Vigilant was, and you know the amount of time and energy and money I poured into that. And you know how I poured myself into it. You know, we had a lot of conversations on there, and you know some of the people that I introduced you to through that and stuff. And really at the end, when I shut down Ever Vigilant, I think like a year ago, with the thought in my mind that was it. I'm done podcasting. I'm moving on. I need to put some more focus on my family. After we had moved down to Texas, I have a different set of priorities. I was done. And at the end of the day, if I looked at my numbers and I looked at my time that I had spent in it, it was a failure. It truly was. It was a failure. Really, probably in podcast world, an epic failure. But the reality was my level of competence in talking to people, my level of confidence in talking to total strangers, my level of competence in holding conversations or sharing my thoughts and letting them out of my brain and forming some kind of verbal mishmash that other people could understand or relate to. My ability to reach out to people as an introvert, to build relationships with people and build a network that was kind of within a small group of people there. But the reality is, Myles, I made friends like you there as well. And if I hadn't taken that leap of faith and started a podcast out of nothing, if I hadn't reached out to people that I didn't know because I wanted to hear what they had to say and record it for a podcast, if I hadn't spent hours and hours editing out all the ums out of my podcast, if I hadn't done that, I would have missed out on relationships and friendships with people like you and so many other people. Mike Baker and Scott Smith and Eric Voris and all these different people that played a different role in what I was doing there, but yet became friends. And I think that that's what I'm saying too, along with what you're unsure of where this goes. You're unsure of where Whiskey and War Stories goes, or unsure of where serving other people in the EMS or your church or PTSD, where it goes. It doesn't matter. All your ideas, all your thoughts, all the great plans that you have don't matter at this time, because sometimes it's not where it ends. It's what happens in between, in the middle, that is so damn important. So, dude, I am so happy to have had this conversation with you, dude. I am so ecstatic that you are back in the loop and feeling better and stuff. I was praying for you. I was pulling for you. I'm so excited to have had this conversation with you and to see what has happened, but also that this is not the end. This has got a whole lot further to go, Myles. And that, to me, right there is powerful, because so many people, you hear their story and their story kind of ends with where they are today. And it's a great story. It's a great testimony. It's super powerful, but you just kind of ended your story. Where you came on and your story isn't ending today. It's still projecting out another 20, 30, 40, 50 years. And I love that, dude. I'm so happy, like I said, to be able to have you back on this podcast and be able to hear your story, hear your battles, and be back. And I look forward to getting back in the mix with you and working on some collaborations and seeing where things go, because it's guys like you that I want to hitch my wagon to. It's guys like you that I want to work alongside, because it's guys like you that have the mentality that I don't need to be protective of what I'm doing. You don't need to stay with what you're doing, because we have the same goal. We have the same mindset. And it's about challenging and encouraging men to prepare, defend, and lead at home and in their communities, just like it's always been. So, dude, brother, I'm so happy to have had this opportunity to talk with you again and hang out with you. And man, I only look forward to where this is going, both for you and for the two of us together, because this epic roller coaster ain't over yet.
That's absolutely correct. I wish I could remember the author. I just ordered his book on Amazon, but it's called The Black Belt Husband. And he has, he posts stuff all the time, and he said something. He says, divorce is not the end of your story. And exactly, it's what it comes down to is, where do you want your story to continue? And Joe, I'd like to say thank you very much. I reclused quite a bit. You were one of the few people, although I didn't call you every week, you were one of the few people I kept in touch with during my, we'll call it my time in the cave. And it was always such a blessing to be able to talk to you and say, hey, man, I haven't talked to you in like 3 months, but will you pray with me? Crap's getting bad again. Or, hey, let me tell you about this win or whatever. And you're absolutely correct. And it's kind of funny you say that Ever Vigilant was a failure. Much like you kind of got stuck right back into it. It's like the concept of the prodigal son, right? You kind of drift off, and God eventually says, I kind of want you back over here, right? So you've relaunched, you're doing new things, and I do like that you kept Prepare, Defend, Lead. I'm glad that you kept that. But thank you for having me on. Thank you for letting me tell my story. I could not really think of a better place, a better podcast, a better platform, whatever you want to say, to really open the Pandora's box that has been my life and my time in the cave, so to speak.
You know what, brother? We're in this together, and we'll keep moving forward. Hang in there, and as I always say, hold fast and God bless, brother. We'll do this again soon. Yeah, absolutely. I'm looking forward to it. For those of you that are interested, I'm on Instagram at Archangel Dynamics LLC is my business page. _Snake Doctor is my fitness page. If you're interested in powerlifting or strongman, it's cool. I post stupid lifting videos. And then on TikTok, Whiskey and War Stories, you can find me there. And of course, as this evolves and I launch the podcast, Joe's going to be involved with that too. So we'll keep in touch. So again, Joe, my friend, thank you for sitting down with me tonight. And again, I'm grateful to have this opportunity. And I really hope that if you are listening and you have gone through the kinds of things that I am going through, I do hope that you got something of value out of this podcast, and I do hope that it brought you some encouragement. Feel free to reach out to me directly if you are and you need resources. Men get crapped on a lot through this process. Reach out to me. I can give you some phone numbers. I can give you some therapists' names. I can give you any help I can give you I want to, because I know the hell that divorce can be. Joe, that's awesome. About all I got today. So I'll hand it back over to you for the outro. Hey, did you give your website?
Oh yeah. So I gave Instagram, it's 2022. It's all about the social media. Yeah. www.archangeldynamics.com is my website currently. We're going to see what happens with the podcast moving forward. I'm about to also move to an online nutrition and fitness programming. So that'll probably be launched along with the podcast. Again, lots of big change, but fun change coming along.
Good deal, dude. I love it. Hang in there, man. Wow. What a great conversation. What a great man. I really appreciate this guy, not only for his friendship, his vulnerability, and his honesty here. I'll leave the links down in the show notes for Myles so you can follow him on social media and keep an eye on what he's up to with his TikTok channel and his Instagram channel, and you can support him. And if you're in Arizona, go to some of his training. I really think that it will benefit you. Dads, are you feeling stuck? Are you feeling lost, frustrated, and feel like you lack a purpose? Are you in a rut, going through the motions day after day and seeming to get nowhere? If I could guarantee to get you out of this rut and give you clarity and direction in your life, to help you find confidence in yourself and your decisions, and help you find purpose, would you take me up on that offer? Here's how it would work. You work with me one-on-one. We would meet once a week on Zoom for 12 weeks. I'll provide you with a personalized plan to get you unstuck and very clear in the direction that you need to go. Weekly video lessons so that you can learn what you need to do, and assignments to put into practice what you learn. Challenges to get you outside of your comfort zone where growth occurs and confidence is born. And I'll even provide the required books, including my favorite book on leadership, an awesome leather-bound journal, and several field notebooks and supplies needed for you to succeed, delivered right to your front door. Now, there will be effort and sacrifice involved because everything of value has a price. But I will be there with you every step of the way with 24/7 support via text so that I can keep you on task. You will need to show up on time and prepared for the one-on-one calls, complete the lessons, challenges, and the assignments, but don't worry, where you see uncertainty in your life right now, I see your potential. I have been there and have experienced this journey myself firsthand. Now, what happens if you show up on time and prepare for the one-on-one calls, complete the lessons, challenges, and assignments for the 12-week duration of the program, and you don't find clarity and direction in your life, you don't feel confident in yourself and your decisions, and you don't find a purpose? Then I will keep coaching you for free until you do. There's absolutely no risk to you of not leveling up. This program isn't about change. It's not about evolution. It's about a new you. It's about uncovering the hero that is within you, but has been buried under years of lies, fear, and expectations of others. Sure, you can continue doing nothing, but you know exactly where that leads. You can try to do it yourself by reading countless books, watching bunches of YouTube videos. Be careful, those cat videos get distracting. And listening to hours of podcasts, hoping to find something that clicks. But if you're serious about finally taking control of your life, dropping the excuses, and becoming the father, husband, and leader that you want to be, let's schedule a strategy call where we can design a plan to get you out of the rut and heading where you want to go. Go to heroeswanted.com/coaching. Right there, you can sign up for a strategy call where I'll spend up to 2 hours with you working out a plan, identifying where you're at, and working out a plan to get you out of that rut and going in the direction that you need to go. As always, men, hold fast and God bless.